In step 3, we added a visual cue for the user to hopefully get them to be interested enough to click or hover over our image. And then we have an overlay that comes in from the bottom. And then we also externalized our CSS. Now, let's take a look at basically creating variations on the overlay. So all of the files, so the working HTML files, which you can view in a browser, and then also an archive of the files, the code and the files used in each of the demos is available to you. Just go down underneath the video to the read more, open that up, and all of the resources will be available to you. All right, now let's take a look at what we have changed. So on the overlay, the div for the overlay class, I have modified overlay to be specific to the variation we're going to create. So we have the original, which is the bottom, and then you'll note I have overlay top, overlay right, left, fade, and scale. And you probably have a pretty good idea where we're going here. So let's go ahead and take a look at our CSS for our overlays. Okay, so let's first, what I'm going to point out here is the H1, which is inside each of the overlays. What I've done is we have to create a list. So we just have overlay bottom H1, comma, then top H1, comma, right H1, so on and so on till we get down to overlay scale H1, and then just make sure there's not a comma, otherwise that'll throw an error. And basically all of the properties are the same. It's just we need to be able to apply the styles to all of the different H1s. Okay. Now I could have said just H1, but what if in your project you had other areas, other elements with an H1 inside? So we're going to be specific. Then if we scroll down, you will notice that we have the same setup for the P tag. Okay. Now, if we scroll down a little further, all right, had to pause for a moment. There was someone at the door. Okay, so where was I? I believe we were moving down and we're going to start talking about the variations for the overlay. So from step 3, all I did was add hyphen bottom to overlay and then kept everything the same. And then you'll notice on the hover, I also have overlay bottom. Okay. Now for overlay top, all we've done here is taken our overlay and moved our overlay up. Now the height is 266, but because this is responsive in the flex element, there's the chance that the element could be smaller or larger depending on how we scale the screen, the browser. So I went ahead and I moved the overlay up 400 pixels, so it should be way above the top. And then pretty much I believe everything else is the same. And then you will see on the hover for overlay top, we set 0. Okay. And now on the right, I've set top to 0. And then on the left, what I've done is move the overlay way over to the left. Again, just in case the image element scales again, because it's a flex element. So I purposely made the overlay go way beyond the right-hand side. Okay, so I just added a much larger left number. And then on the hover, we have the left come back to 0. Okay, so on the overlay right, we're actually using a lot more left to move the element this way beyond the right edge. Okay, and again, that's just just in case there's a scale issue. On overlay left, this was pretty easy. I just went ahead and moved the left to -600. And again, I added extra to moving this to the left just in case. Otherwise, that was all we changed. So now on the hover, we would set the left back to 0. On overlay fade, I kept the left and the top at 0. And then on the background, just set the opacity to 0.00. So now on the hover, overlay fade, I changed the opacity to 0.9, which is what the other backgrounds already were set to. Now scale, this is our last variation. And on the scale, again, the top and the left are 0, and we leave the width and the height the same. What I'm doing is adding a transform origin. So if you think about in Photoshop, when you have an element, an image, and when you click on that image, you have the ability, and the same is true in Illustrator, you have the ability to set the origin point to one of the 4 corners, to the center, or wherever you click. Well, it's the same concept here. We use the transform origin property, and then I'm saying set the origin point to 50% X, 50% Y. So we can move that origin point anywhere we want. This way, when we scale or rotate or whatever we do, we can spin our element around the center. Okay? So what we're doing on the, and then I should mention, then we have transform scale. I'm setting the X to 0, and we are setting the Y scale to 0. And now on our overlay, our hover overlay scale, I'm going to go ahead and set, I should also point out up here, in this instance, I also set the background opacity to 0. So now in the image hover overlay scale, I'm going to change the opacity to 0.9, and we're going to change the transform scale to 1 on the X and 1 on the Y. So in this case, 1 means 100%. Its original size. If we wanted this twice the size, we would have 2.0. So I've gone from 0 to basically 1, or 0 to 100%. Okay, so let's take a look and see what we have. So we have our original. Let me go ahead and update here. So we have our original where we have the overlay from the bottom. Now we have our overlay come from the top. Our overlay from the right-hand side. From the left-hand side, we have a simple fade. And then lastly, a fade and a scale. So it's actually very easy to change or to add variation to your overlay. Now, it's all about however creative you want to be. So there's no reason that you could not have your, and it's kind of annoying, I won't go off of this, so it won't keep doing the hover. So you could figure out how to have this slide in at diagonals if you choose. You could have this do a rotation from the center. You could have this change colors. If you really wanted to be clever and add another div to hold your text, So your text is not necessarily inside the div that is the overlay, but maybe you have color overlay and then you have text overlay, both in separate divs. Then you could animate both. So you could have your overlay do one thing and you could have your type do something else. But they would have to be, it would be easiest if they were on or in separate divs. All right, so there you go, adding some variation to the overlay for our image hovers.